All right, hello. So last off, we uh we we left off with a big kind of mindfuck where uh Lilina was talking about wanting to have Bernard Marks, and well, I can't really explain it, but it was a whole bunch of like, what was it like? It was like about like sexual reproduction, sexual expression, mostly like these things. Yes, listen, Chandler can fill you in. It's gonna be scrolling. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because that's kind of frowned upon. Because, everybody belongs to everybody else. That's the saying that they kept on repeating throughout the whole chapter. But yes, we will go into chapter 4. I should have my glasses on. By the way, glasses. Glasses. Here you are. And a good thing because I have already eaten, I have already taken a shower, so there's no rush here. No rush at all. Excuse me. Alright. So we begin chapter 4. I'm pretty sure this is not going to be as mind-fucking as the other ones. No, I don't think so. So there's two parts in chapter 4. So there's chapter 4, part 1. The lift was crowded with men from the Alpha changing rooms, and Lilina's entry was greeted by mainly friendly nods and smiles. She was a popular girl, and at one time or another had spent a night with almost all of them. They were dear boys, she thought, as she returned their salutations. Charming boys. Still, she did wish that George Edsell's ears weren't quite so big. Perhaps he'd been given just a spot too much parathyroid at meter 328. And looking at Benito Hoover, she couldn't help remembering that he was really too hairy when he took his clothes off. Turning, with eyes a little saddened by the recollection of Benito's curly blackness, she saw in a corner the small thin body, the melancholy face of Bernard Marks. "Bernard!" She stepped up to him. "I was looking for you." Her voice rang clear above the hum of the mounting lift. The others looked around curiously. "I wanted to talk to you about our New Mexico plan." "Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about our New Mexico plan." Out of the tail of her eye, she could see Benito Hoover gaping with astonishment. The gape annoyed her. "Surprised I shouldn't be begging to go with him again," she said to herself. Then aloud, and more warmly than ever, "I'd simply love to come with you for a week in July," she went on. Anyhow, she was publicly proving her unfaithfulness to Henry. Fanny ought to be pleased, even though it was Bernard. "That is," Lilina gave him her most deliciously significant smile, "if you still want to have me." Bernard's pale face flushed. "What on earth for?" She wondered. Astonished, but at the same time touched by this strange tribute to her power. "Hadn't we better talk about it somewhere else?" he stammered, looking horribly uncomfortable. As though I had been saying something shocking, thought Lelina. He couldn't look more upset if I'd made a dirty joke, asked him who his mother was, or something like that. I mean, with all these people about, she was choked with confusion. Lelina's laugh was frank and wholly unmalicious. How funny you are, she said, and she quite genuinely did think he was funny. You'll give me at least a week's warning, won't you? She went on in another tone. I suppose we take the blue Pacific rocket. Yeah, I suppose we take the blue Pacific. I suppose we take the blue Pacific rocket. Does it start from the Charing T Tower, or is it from Hampstead? Before Bernard could answer, the lift came to a standstill. Roof! called a creaking voice. The liftman was a small simian creature, dressed in a black tunic of an epsilon minus semi-moron. Oh my god. Yeah, you heard that right. The liftman was a small simian creature, dressed in a black tunic of an epsilon minus semi-moron. Roof! He flung open the gates. The warm glory of afternoon sunlight made him start and blink his eyes. Oh, roof! He repeated in a voice of rapture. He was as though suddenly and joyfully awakened from a dark, annihilating stupor. Roof! He smiled up with a kind of doggedly expectant adoration into the faces of his passengers. Talking and laughing together, they stepped out into the light. The liftman looked after them. Roof? He said once more, questioningly. Then a bell rang, and from the ceiling of the lift, a loudspeaker began, very softly, and yet very imperiously, to issue its command. Go down, it said. Go down. Floor 18. Go down. Floor 18. Go down. Go. The liftman slammed the gates, touched a button, and instantly dropped back into the droning twilight of the well, the twilight of his own habitual stupor. It was warm and bright on the roof. The summer afternoon was drowsy with the hum of passing helicopters and the deeper drone of the rocket planes hastening, invisible, through the bright sky 5 or 6 miles unheard. Through the bright sky, 5 or 6 miles overhead, was like a caress on the soft air. Bernard Marx drew a deep breath. He looked up into the sky and round the blue horizon, and finally down into Evelina's face. Isn't it beautiful? Her voice trembled a little. She smiled at him with an expression of the most sympathetic understanding. Simply perfect for obstacle golf, she answered rapturously. And now I must fly, Bernard. Henry gets cross if I keep him waiting. Let me know in good time about the date. And waving her hand, she ran away across the wide flat roof toward the hangars. Bernard stood watching the retreating twinkle of the white stockings, the sunburnt knees vivaciously bending and unbending again and again, and the softer rolling of those well-fitted corduroy shorts beneath the bottle green jacket. His face wore an expression of pain. I should say she was pretty, said a loud and cheery voice just behind him. Bernard started and looked around. I think maybe they did. Hold on. Simeon. did. Because it said they said the Liffman was a small simian creature. And I just looked up simian right now, and it is a primate. So, yes, I think they can genetically regress people into apes. Simians, are they around today, or were they... Oh, simians are kind of like... Yeah. This book is scary, dude. Yeah, so you can view them as like a chimpanzee or like a red-faced spider monkey. Um, yeah, simians are sisters to the tarsiers, together forming the haplorhines. Yeah. Yeah, dude. It's... This book is pretty scary. Alright. Uh... Where should I... Where did I go? Okay. Back to where I was. I should say she was pretty, said a loud and cheery voice just behind him. Bernard looked around. The chubby red face of Benito Hoover was beaming down at him, beaming with manifest cordiality. Benito was notoriously good-natured. People said of him that he could have got through life without ever touching Soma. The malice and bad tempers from which other people had to take holidays never afflicted him. Reality for Benito was always sunny. Pneumatic, too. And how? Then, in another tone, "But, I say," he went on, "you look glum. What you need is a gram of Soma." Diving into his right-hand trouser pocket, Benito produced a file. 1 cubic centimeter cures 10 gloomy... But I say... Bernard had suddenly turned and rushed away. Benito stared after him. What can the matter be with the fellow? He wondered, and shaking his head, decided that the story about the alcohol having put too much... he wondered, and shaking his head, decided that the story about the alcohol having been put into the poor chap's blood surrogate must be true. Touched his brain, I suppose. He put away the Soma bottle and, taking out a packet of sex hormone chewing gum, stuffed a plug into his cheek and walked slowly towards the hangars, ruminating. Henry Foster had had his machine wheeled out of its lockup, and when Lenina, I think I keep on saying Lelina, but no, it's Lenina. That's gonna be weird to say. Waiting for this guy to show up. Yeah, exactly. Um, Henry Foster had had his machine wheeled out of its lockup, and when Lanina, okay, that's gonna be a weird. I'm having a really hard time like saying that name. Lanina. When Lanina arrived, it when Lanina arrived, was already seated in the cockpit waiting. 4 minutes late was all his comment, and she climbed in behind him. He started the engines and flew the helicopter screws into gear. The machine shot vertically into the air. Henry accelerated. The humming of the propellers shrilled from hornet to wasp to mosquito. The speedometer showed that they were rising at the best part of 2 kilometers a minute. London diminished beneath them. The huge table-topped buildings were no more in a few seconds than a bed of geometrical mushrooms sprouting from the green of park and garden. In the midst of them, thin stalked, a taller, slenderer fungus, the charring tea tower lifted towards a sky. In the midst of them, thin stalked, a taller, slenderer fungus, the charring tea tower lifted towards the sky, a disk of shining concrete. Like the vague torsos of fabulous athletes, huge fleshy clouds lulled on the blue air above their heads. Out on one of them suddenly dropped a small scarlet insect, buzzing as it fell. "There's the red rocket," said Henry. "Just come in from New York." Looking at his watch. 7 minutes behind time, he added and shook his head. "These Atlantic services, they're really scandalously unpunctual." He took his foot off the accelerator. The humming of the screws overhead dropped an octave and a half. Back through wasp and hornet, to bumblebee, to cockchafer, to stag beetle. The upward rush of the machine slackened off. A moment later, they were hanging motionless in the air. Henry pushed at a lever. There was a click, slowly at first, then faster and faster, till it was a circular mist before their eyes. Yeah, slowly at first, then faster and faster till it was a circular mist before their eyes. Hold on, I need to read this right, because this scene is getting me a little, confused. Okay, till it was slowly at first, then faster and faster, till it was a circular mist before their eyes. The propeller in front of them began to revolve. The wind of a horizontal speed whistled ever more shrilly in the wind of a horizontal speed whistled even more shrilly in the stays. Henry kept his eye on the revolution counter. When the needle touched the 1200 mark, he threw the helicopter screws out of gear. The machine had enough forward momentum to be able to fly on its planes. Lilina looked down through the window and Lilina looked down through the window in the floor between her feet. They were flying over the 6-kilometer zone of parkland that separated central London from its first ring of satellite suburbs. The green was maggoty with foreshortened life. Forests of centrifugal bumble puppy towers gleamed between the trees. Near Shepherd's Bush, 2,000 beta minus mixed doubles were playing Riemann surface tennis. A double row of escalator fives courts lined the main road from Notting Hill to Wimbledon. In the Ealing Stadium a Delta gymnastic display and community sing was in progress. "What a hideous color khaki is," remarked Lenina, voicing the hypnopedic prejudices of her caste. The building of the Hounslow Feely studio covered 7.5 hectares. Near them, a black and khaki army of laborers was busy revitrifying. Yeah. Near them, a black and khaki army of laborers was busy revitrifying the surface of the Great West Road. One of the huge traveling cubicles was being tapped as they flew over. The molten stone poured out in a stream of dazzling incandescence across the road. The asbestos rollers came and went. At the tail of an insulated watering cart, the stream rose in white clouds. At Brentford, the television corporation's factory was like a small town. "They must be changing the shift," said Lenina. Like aphids and aphids. Why? Like aphids and ants. The green leaf gamma girls, the black semi-morons, swarmed around the entrances or stood in queues to take their place in the monorail trammed cars. Mulberry colored beta minuses came and went along the crowd. The roof of the main building was alive with the alighting and departure of helicopters. "My word," said Lenina. Why is that so hard for me to say? Lenina. And I think I've been saying Lelina instead. Oops. "My word," said Lenina. "I'm glad I'm not a gamma." 10 minutes later, they were at Stoke Poges and had started their first round of obstacle golf. And that's the end of part 1. We're still on chapter 4, but now this is part 2. Part 2. With eyes for the most part downcast, and if ever they lighted on a fellow creature at once and furtively averted, Bernard hastened across the roof. He was like a man pursued by enemies he does not wish to see, lest they should seem more hostile even than he had supposed, and he himself be made to feel guiltier and even more helplessly alone. That horrible Benito Hoover! And yet the man had meant well enough, which only made it, in a way, much worse. Those who meant well behaved in the same way as those who meant badly. Even Lenina was making him suffer. He remembered those weeks of timid indecision, during which he looked and longed and despaired of ever having the courage to ask her. Dared he face the risk of being humiliated by a contemptuous refusal? Yeah, dared he dared he face the risk of being humiliated by a contemptuous refusal? But if she were to say yes, what rapture? Well, now she had said it, and he was still wretched. Wretched that she should have thought it such a perfect afternoon for obstacle golf. That she should have trotted away to join Henry Foster. That she should have found him funny for not wanting to talk of their most private affairs in public. Wretched, in a word, because she had behaved as any healthy and virtuous English girl ought to have behaved, and not in some other abnormal, extraordinary way. He opened the door to his lockup and called to a lounging couple of Delta Minus attendants to come and push his machine out on the roof. The hangars were staffed a single Bukonovsky group, and the men were twins, identically small, black and hideous. Bernard gave his orders in the sharp, rather arrogant and even offensive tone of one who does not feel himself too secure in his superiority. To have dealings with members of the lower caste was always, for Bernard, a most distressing experience. For whatever the cause, and the current gossip about the alcohol in his blood surrogate may very well likely, for incidents will have been true. Bernard's physique was hardly better than that of the average Gamma. He stood 8 centimeters short of the standard alpha height, and was slender in proportion. Contact with members of the lower castes always reminded him painfully of this physical inadequacy. I am I, and wish I wasn't. His self-consciousness was acute and distressing. Each time he found himself looking on the level instead of downward into Adelta's face, he felt humiliated. Would the creature treat him with respect due to his caste? The question haunted him, not without reason, for gammas, deltas, and epsilons had been to some extent conditioned to associate corporeal mass with social superiority. Indeed, a faint hypnopaetic prejudice in favor of size was universal. Hence the laughter of the women to whom he made proposals, the practical joking of his equals among the men. The mockery made him feel an outsider, and feeling an outsider, he behaved like one, which increased the prejudice against him and intensified the contempt and hostility aroused by his physical defects, which in turn increased the sense of being alien and alone. The chronic fear of being slighted made him avoid his equals, made him stand where his inferiors were concerned, self-consciously on his dignity. How bitterly he envied men like Henry Foster and Benito Hoover, men who never had to shout at an epsilon to get an order obeyed, men who took their position for granted, men who moved through the caste system as a fish moves through water, so utterly at home to be unaware either of themselves or of the beneficent, or of the beneficent. Am I saying that right? I feel like I'm saying that right, but I want to make sure. Beneficent. Oh no, I'm not saying it right. Oh wait, no, I did say it right. Did I? Beneficent. Okay, cool. So utterly at home to be unaware either of themselves or of the beneficent and comfortable element in which they had their being. So slackly, it seemed to him, and with reluctance, the twin attendants wheeled his plane out of the roof. "Hurry up!" said Bernard irritably. One of them glanced at him. Was that a kind of bestial derision that he detected in those blank gray eyes? Hurry up! He shouted more loudly, and there was an ugly rasp in his voice. He climbed into the plane and a minute later was flying southwards towards the river. The various Bureaucrats? Oh, I think it's Bureaucrats. Hold on, I need to adjust myself. The various bureaus of propaganda and the College of Emotional Engineering were housed in a single 60-story building in Fleet Street. In the basement and on the lower floors were the presses and offices of the three great London newspapers, the Hourly Radio, an Applecast sheet in pale green, Gamma Gazette, and on khaki paper in words exclusively of one syllable, the Delta Mirror. Then came the bureaus of propaganda by television, by feeling picture, and by synthetic voice and music, respectively, 22 floors of them. Above were the research laboratories and the padded rooms in which the soundtrack writers and synthetic composers did their delicate work. The top 18 floors were occupied by the College of Emotional Engineering. Bernard landed on the roof of Propaganda House and stepped out. Ring down to Mr. Helmholtz Watson, he ordered the Gamma Plus porter, and tell him that Mr. Bernard Marx is waiting for him on the roof. He sat down and lit a cigarette. Helmholtz Watson was writing when the message came down. Tell him I am coming at once, he said, and hung up the receiver. Then, turning to his secretary, I'll leave you to put my things away. He went on in the same official and impersonal tone, and ignoring her lustrous smile, got up and walked briskly to the door. He was a powerfully built man, deep-chested, broad-shouldered, massive, and yet quick in his movements, springly and agile. The round, strong pillar of his neck supported a beautifully shaped head. His hair was dark and curly, his features strongly marked. In a forcible and emphatic way, he was handsome and looked as his secretary was never tired of repeating every centimeter and alpha plus. By profession, he was a lecturer at the College of Emotional Engineering, Department of Writing, and in the intervals of his educational activities, a working emotional engineer. He wrote regularly for the Hourly Radio, composed feely scenarios, and had the happiest knack for slogans and hypnopoeic rhymes. Able was the verdict of his superior. Able was the verdict of his superiors. Perhaps they would shake their heads, would significantly lower their voices. A little too able. Yes, a little too able, they were right. A mental excess had produced in Helmholtz Watson hold on. I need to drink some water. Okay. Man, only 30 minutes and I'm kind of almost done with like 5 more pages. Cool. Okay. Killing it. Hell yeah, boy. A mental excess had produced in Helmholtz-Watson. Hold on. There we go. Maybe that's too loud. There we go. A mental excess had produced in Helmholtz-Watson effects very similar to those which, in Bernard Marx, were the result of a physical defect. Too little bone and brawn had isolated Bernard from his fellow men, and the sense of his apartness, being, by all the current standards, a mental excess, became in its turn a cause of wider separation. That which had made Helmholtz so uncomfortably aware of being himself and all alone was too much ability. That which had made Helmholtz so uncomfortably aware of himself and all alone was too much ability. What the two men shared was the knowledge that they were individuals, but whereas the physical defect Bernard had suffered all his life from the consciousness of being separate, it was only quite recently that, grown aware of his mental excess, Helmholtz-Watson had also become aware of his difference from the people who surrounded him. This escalator squash champion, this indefatigable, I know what it's trying to say. Hold on. Indefatigable. What? Indefatigable. I feel so stupid. I feel so stupid right now. I'm so sorry. Indefatigable. Oh, I was like saying it, like pronouncing it weird. Indefatigable. Okay, I can try saying that one. But I see the fatigue part, and I want to pronounce fatigue as it is. And that's what's screwing me over. This escalator squash champion, this indefatigable lover. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true, but also I still feel dumb. You can't change that. You can make me feel better, but it won't change that I still feel bad. But it's okay. I feel like not a lot of people are gonna listen to this much. I don't know. Views say that, like, people have viewed, like, my first reading video, like, I have, like, 87 views, but that doesn't tell me, well, it does tell me, but I don't want to look into it, like, how long they stayed to listen to it. So they probably just, I don't know, maybe for the true listeners, they'll be like, yeah, we listen. But anyways. Getting off topic here. Again. Like I always do. But maybe people like that. Okay. This escalator squash champion. This indefatigable lover. As it was said that he had had 640 different girls in under 4 years. This admirable committee man, the best mixer, had realized quite suddenly that sport, women, communal activities were only, so far as he was concerned, second best. Really, and at the bottom, he was interested in something else. But in what? In what? That was the problem which Bernard had come to discuss with him, or rather, since it was Helmholtz who did all the talking, to listen to his friend discussing yet once more. And yes, yeah, Chandler, you heard that right. He has had 640 different girls in under 4 years. I think they're talking about Helmholtz too. Or no, or is that Bernard? Now I'm confused. Right? Three charming girls from the bureaucracy of propaganda by synthetic voice waylaid him as he stepped out of the lift. Oh, Helmholtz, darling, do come and have a picnic supper with us on Exmoor. They clung around him imploringly. He shook his head. He pushed his way through them. No. We're not inviting any other man. But Helmholtz remained unshaken, even by this delightful promise. No, he repeated, I'm busy. And he held resolutely on his course. The girls trailed after him. It was not until he had actually climbed into Bernard's plane and slammed the door that they gave pursuit. Not without reproaches. These women, he said, as the machine rose into the air. These women. And he shook his head. He frowned. Too awful, Bernard hypocritically agreed, wishing, as he spoke the words, that he could have as many girls as Helmholtz did, and with as little trouble. He was seized with the sudden urgent need to boast. I'm taking Lenina Crown to New Mexico with me, he said in a tone as casual as he could make it. Are you? Said Helmholtz, with a total absence of interest. And then after a little pause, This last week or two, he went on, I've been cutting all my committees and all my girls. You can't imagine what a hullabaloo they've been making about at the college. Still, it's been worth it, I think. The effects, he hesitated. Well, they're odd. They're very odd. Okay. I'm going to read this again. A physical shortcoming could produce a kind of mental excess. The process, it seemed, was reversible. Mental excess could produce, for its own purposes, a voluntary blindness and deafness of deliberate solitude, the artificial impotence of asceticism? Hold on. Asceticism. Mental excess could produce, for its own purposes, the voluntary blindness and deafness of deliberate solitude, the artificial impotence of asceticism. The rest of the short flight was accomplished in silence. When they had arrived and were comfortably stretched out on the pneumatic sofas of Bernard's home, Helmholtz began again, speaking very slowly. Did you ever feel, he asked, as though you had something inside you that was only waiting for you to give it a chance to come out? Some sort of extra power that you aren't using. You know, like all the water that goes down the falls instead of through the turbines. He looked at Bernard questioningly. You mean all the emotions one might be feeling Let me say that again. You mean all the emotions one might be feeling if things were different? Helmholtz shook his head. Not quite. I've been thinking of a queer feeling I sometimes get. A feeling that I've got something important to say, and the power to say it. Only I don't know what it is. Yeah, only I don't know what it is, and I can't make any use of the power. If there was some way, if there was some different way of writing, or or else something else to write about. He was silent. Then, you see, he went on at last. I'm pretty good at inventing phrases. You know, the sort of words that suddenly make you jump, almost as though you'd sat on a pin. They seem so new and exciting, even though they're about something hypnotically obvious. But that doesn't seem enough. It's not enough for the phrases to be good. What you make with them ought to be good too. But your things are good, Helmholtz. Oh, as far as they go. Helmholtz shrugged his shoulders. But they can go such a little way. They aren't important enough, somehow. I feel I could do something much more important. Yes, and more intense, more violent. But what? What is there more important to say? And how can one be violent and how can one be violent about the sort of things one's expected to write? Words can be like x-rays. If you don't use them properly, they'll go through anything. They'll go through anything. You read and you're pierced. And that's one of the things I try to teach my students. How to write piercingly. But what on earth's the good of being pierced by an article about a community sing or the latest improvement in scent organs? Besides, can you make words really piercing? You know, like the very hardest x-rays when you're writing about that sort of thing? Can you say something about nothing? That's what it finally boils down to. I try. Hush, said Bernard suddenly, and lifted a warning finger. They listened. I believe there's somebody at the door, he whispered. Helmholtz got up, tiptoed across the room, and with a sharp, quick movement, flung the door wide open. There was, of course, nobody there. I'm sorry, said Bernard, feeling and looking uncomfortably foolish. I suppose I've got things on my nerves a bit. When people are suspicious of you, you start being suspicious of them. He passed his hand across his eyes. He sighed. His voice became plaintive. He was just justifying himself. If you knew what I'd had to put up with recently, he said almost tearfully, and the uprush of his self-pity was like a fountain suddenly released. If only you knew. Helmholtz Watson listened with a certain sense of discomfort. Poor little Bernard, he said to himself, but at the same time, he felt rather ashamed for his friend. He wished Bernard would show a little more pride. And that is the end of chapter 4. Oh, chapter 5 is also in parts too. Oh shit, are they all in parts? Oh no, they're not all in parts. But yes, I will also read chapter 5 too. I think that's gonna be the last chapter I'll read. Just because these are really dense. Alright. So this is chapter 5, part 1. Yeah, chapter 5, part 1. By 8 o'clock, the light was failing. The loudspeakers in the tower of the Stokes Pogues Club house began, in a more than human tenor, to announce the closing of the courses. Lenina and Henry abandoned their game and walked back towards the club. From the grounds of the Internal and External Secretion Trust came the lowing of those thousands of cattle which provided, with their hormones and their milk, the raw materials for the great factory of Farnham Royal. An incessant buzzing of helicopters filled the twilight. Every 2.5 minutes, a bell and the screech of whistles announced the departure of one of the light monorail trains, which carried the lower caste golfers back from their separate course to the metropolis. Lenina and Henry climbed into the machine and started off. At 800 feet, Henry slowed down the helicopter screws, and they hung for a minute or two, poised above the fading landscape. The forest of Burnham beaches stretched like a great pool of darkness towards the bright shores of the western sky. Crimson at the horizon, the last of the sunset faded through orange, upwards into yellow and a pale watery green. Northwards, beyond and above the trees, the internal and external secretions factory glared with a fierce electric brilliance from every window of its 20 stories. Beneath them lay the building of the golf club, the huge lower caste barracks, and on the other side of a dividing wall, the smaller houses reserved for Alpha and Beta members. The approaches of the monorail station were black. Yeah, hold on. I just need to readjust myself again. Alright. Yeah, the approaches to the monorail station were black, with an ant-like pollution of lower caste activity. And from under the glass vault, a lighted train shot out into the open. Following its southeasterly course across the dark plain, their eyes were drawn to the majestic buildings of the slow crematorium. For the safety of night-flying planes, its 4 tall chimneys were flooded light and tipped with crimson danger signals. It was a landmark. Why do the smokestacks have those things like balconies around them? Inquired Lenina. Phosphorus recovery, explained Henry telegraphically. On the way up to the chimney, the gases go through 4 separate treatments. P2O5, P2O5. Yeah, those are chemical. Those are elements, but I can't really. Phosphorus and oxygen, maybe? Periodic table. Yeah, I think it might be phosphorus, but I'm not sure. It's a P. Oh yeah, phosphorus and oxygen. So, phosphorus 2 Oxygen 5. Yeah. On their way up to the chimney, the gases go through 4 separate treatments. Phosphorus 2, Oxygen 5, used to go right out of the circulation every night they cremated someone. Now they recover over 90% of it. Over 98% of it. More than 1.5 kilos per adult corpse, which makes the best part of 400 tons of phosphorus every year from England alone. Henry spoke with a happy pride, rejoicing wholeheartedly in the achievement, as though it had been his own. Fine to think that we can go on being socially useful even after we're dead, making plants grow. Lenina, meanwhile, turned her eyes away and was looking perpendicularly downwards at the monorail station. Fine, she agreed. But queer that alphas and betas won't make any more plants grow than those nasty little gammas and deltas and epsilons down there. All men are physico-chemically equal, said Henry sententiously. Besides, even epsilons perform indispensable services. Even an epsilon. Just had to get some water. Even an epsilon, Lenina suddenly remembered. An occasion when, as a little girl at school, she had woken up in the middle of the night and become aware, for the first time, of the whispering that had haunted all her sleeps. She saw again the beam of moonlight, a row of small white beds, heard once more the soft voice that said the words were there, unforgotten, unforgettable after so many night-long repetitions. Everyone works for everyone else. We can't do without anyone. Even epsilons are useful. We couldn't do without epsilons. Everyone works for everyone else. We can't do without anyone. Lolina remembered her first shock of fear and surprise, her speculations through half a wakeful hour, and then, under the influence of those endless repetitions, the gradual soothing of her mind, the stealthy creeping of sleep. I suppose epsilons really don't mind being epsilons, she said aloud. Of course they don't. How can they? They don't know what it's like being anything else. We'd mind, of course, but then we've been differently conditioned. Besides, we start with a different heredity. I'm glad I'm not an epsilon, said Lenina with conviction. And if you were an epsilon, said Henry, your conditioning would have made you no less thankful that you weren't a beta or an alpha. He put his forward propeller into gear and headed the machine towards London. Behind them, in the west, the crimson and orange were almost faded. A dark bank of cloud had crept into the zenith. As they flew over the crematorium, the plane shot upwards on the column of hot air rising from the chimneys, only to fall as suddenly as it passed into the descending chill beyond. What a marvelous switchback! Lenina laughed delightedly. But Henry's tone was almost, for a moment, melancholy. Do you know what that switchback was? He said. It was some human being finally and definitely disappearing, going up in a squirt of hot gas. It would be curious to know who it was. A man or a woman, an alpha or an epsilon. he sighed. Then, in a resolutely cheerful voice, anyhow, he concluded, there's one thing we can be certain of. Whoever he may have been, he was happy when he was alive. Everybody's happy now. Yes, everybody's happy now, echoed Lenina. They had heard the words repeated 150 times every night for 12 years. Standing on the roof of Henry's 40-story apartment house in Westminster, they went straight down to the dining hall. There, in a loud and cheerful company, they ate an excellent meal. Soma was served with the coffee. Lenina took 2 half-gram tablets, and Henry 3. At 9:20, they walked across the street to the newly opened Westminster Abbey Cabaret. It was a night almost without clouds, moonless and starry. But of this, on the whole depressing fact, Lenina and Henry were fortunately unaware. The electric sky signs effectively shut off the outer darkness. Calvin Stopes and his 16 saxophonists, and it's not saxophonists. I want to make sure I'm saying this right. Saxophonist. Okay, yeah. No, then I'm saying it right. Because it's not saxophonist. It's not. At least I don't think so. Okay. Where was I? Oh, okay, yeah. The electric sky signs effectively shut off the outer darkness. Calvin Stopes and his 16 saxophonists. From the facade of the new abbey, the giant letters invitingly glared. London's finest scent and color organ. All the latest synthetic music. They entered. The air seemed hot and somehow breathless, with the scent of ambergris and sandalwood. On the domed ceiling of the hall, the color organ had momentarily painted the colorful organ had temporarily painted a tropical sunset. The 16 saxophonists were playing an old favorite. There ain't no bottle in all the world that ain't like there ain't no bottle in all the world that like that dear little bottle of mine. 400 couples were 5-stepping around the polished floor. Lenina and Henry were soon the 401st. The saxophones wailed in melodious The saxophones wailed like melodious cats under the moon, moaned in the alto and tenor registers as though the little death were upon them. Rich with the wealth of harmonics, their tremulous chorus mounted towards a climax, louder and louder, louder and ever louder, until at last, at a wave of his hand, the conductor let loose the final shattering note of ether music and blew the 16 merely human blowers clean out of existence. Thunder in A-flat major, and then all in but silence, all in but darkness. There followed a gradual detergents. Detergents? Yeah, detergents. Diminuendo. A diminuendo sliding gradually through quarter tones, down to a finely fainting whispered dominant chord that lingered on, while the 5/4 rhythms still pulsed below. Hold on. I gotta adjust myself again. Okay. Yeah, down to a faintly whispered dominant chord that lingered on, while the 5/4 rhythms still pulsed below, charging the darkened seconds with an intense expectancy. And at last expectancy was fulfilled. There was a sudden explosive sunrise, and simultaneously the 16 burst into song. Bottle of mine, it's you I've always wanted. Bottle of mine, why was I ever decanted? Skies are blue inside of you. The weather's always fine. For there ain't no bottle in the world like that dear bottle of mine. 5-stepping with the other 400 round one Westminster Abbey, Lenina and Henry were yet dancing in another world. The warm, the richly colored, the indefinitely friendly world of Soma Holiday. How kind, how good-looking, how delightfully amusing everyone was. Bottle of mine, it's you I've always wanted. But Lenina and Henry had what they wanted. They were inside, here and now, safely inside with the fine weather, the perennially blue sky. And when exhausted, the 16 had laid by their saxophones and their synthetic music apparatus. And the synthetic music apparatus was producing the very latest and slow Malthusian blues. They may have been twin embryos gently rocking together on the waves of a bottled ocean of blood surrogate. Good night, dear friends. Good night, dear friends. On the loudspeakers veiled the commands in a genial and musical politeness. Good night, dear friends. Obediently, with all the others, Lenina and Henry left the building. The depressing stars had traveled quite some way across the heavens, but though the separating screen of the high signs had now, to a great extent, dissolved, the two young people still retained their happy ignorance of the night. Swallowing half an hour before closing time, that second dose of soma had raised a quite impenetrable wall between the actual universe and their minds. Bottled, they crossed the street. Bottled, they took the lift up to Henry's room on the 28th floor. And yet, as she was, and in spite of the second gram of soma, Lenina did not forget to take all the concentration. And yet, bottled as she was, and in spite of the second gram of soma, Lenina did not forget to take all the contraceptive precautions prescribed by the regulations. Years of intensive hypnopedia and from 12 to 17, Malthusian drill 3 times a week had made the taking of these precautions almost as automatic and inevitable as blinking. Oh, and that reminds me, she said, as she came back from the bathroom. Fanny Crown wants to know where you found those lovely green Morocco surrogate cartridge. Fanny Crown wants to know where you found that lovely green Morocco surrogate cartridge belt you gave me. And that is the end of part 1 of chapter 5. And now we're on to part 2 of chapter 5. Alright, part 2. Alternate Thursdays were Bernard's Solidarity Service days. After an early dinner at the Aphroditeum, to which Helmholtz had recently been elected under Rule 2, he took leave to his friend and, hailing a taxi on the roof, told the man to fly to Fortson Community Singery. The machine rose a couple hundred meters, then headed eastwards, and as it turned, there before Bernard's eyes, gigantically beautiful, was the Singery. Flooded light, its 320 meters of white Kakaraka surrogate gleamed with a snowy incandescence over Ludgate Hill. At each of the 4 corners of its helicopter platform, an immense T shone crimson against the night, and from the mouths of 24 vast golden trumpets rumbled a solemn synthetic music. Damn, I'm late, Bernard said to himself as he first caught sight of Big Henry, the Singery clock. And sure enough, as he was paying off his cab, Big Henry sounded the hour. Ford! sang out an immense bass voice from all the golden trumpets. Ford! 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 9 times. Bernard ran for the lift. The great auditorium for Ford's Day celebrations and other mass community things was at the bottom of the building. Above it, 100 to each floor, there were 7,000 rooms used by solidarity groups for their fortnight services. Bernard dropped down to floor 33, hurried along the corridor, stood hesitating for a moment outside room 3210, then, having wound himself up, opened the door and walked in. Thank Ford, he was not the last. 3 chairs of the 12 arranged around the circular table. 3 chairs of the 12 arranged around the circular table were still unoccupied. He slipped into the nearest of them as inconspicuously as he could, and prepared to frown at the yet later comers when they should arrive. Turning towards him, "What were you playing this afternoon?" the girl on the left inquired. "Obstacle or electromagnetic?" Bernard looked at her. "Ford, it was Morgana Rothschild," and blushingly had to admit that he had been playing neither. Morgana stared at him with astonishment. There was an awkward silence. Then, pointedly, she turned away and addressed herself to the more sporting man on her left. A good beginning for a solidarity service, thought Bernard miserably, and foresaw for himself yet another failure to achieve atonement. If only he had given himself time to look around instead of scuttling to the nearest chair, he could have sat next to Fifi Bradloff or Joanna Diesel. Instead of which he had gone and blindly planted himself next to Morgana. Morgana! Ford, those black eyebrows of hers, that eyebrow rather, for they met above the nose. Ford! And on his right was Clara Turding. True, Clara's eyebrows did not meet, but she was really too pneumatic. Whereas Fifi and Joanna were absolutely right. Plump, blonde, not too large. And it was that great lout, Tom Kawaguchi, who now took the seat between them. The last arrival was Syringy Engels. "You're late," said the president of the group severely. "Don't let it happen again." Syringy apologized and slid into her place between Jim Volkanovsky and Herbert Bakunin. The group was now complete. The solidarity circle perfect and without flaw. Man, woman, man, in an endless ring, in a ring of endless alternation round the table. 12 of them ready to be made one, waiting to come together to be fused, to lose their 12 separate identities in a larger ring. The president stood up, made the sign of the T, and switching on the synthetic music, let loose the soft, indefatigable beating of drums and a choir of instruments, nearing wind and superstring, that plangently repeated and repeated the brief and inescapably haunting melody of the first solidarity hymn, again, and it was not the ear that heard the pulsing rhythm. It was the midriff, the wail and the clang of those recurring harmonies haunted, not in the mind, but in the yearning bowels of compassion. The president made another sign of the T and sat down. The service had begun. The dedicated soma tablets were placed at the center of the table. The loving cup of strawberry ice cream soma was passed from hand to hand, and with a formula, "I drank to my annihilation," 12 times quaffed. Then to the accompaniment of the synthetic orchestra, the first solidarity hymn was sung. "Ford, we are 12, oh, make us one. Like drops within the social river, oh, make us now together run, as swiftly as thy shining flivver." Hold on. Okay, I am back. My brother is doing some painting, and he wanted to show me what it was looking like. Okay. Fuck, dude, I'm tired. I think this... Yeah, I have like 6 more pages. Actually, maybe 5. 5 or 6, but it's gonna go pretty smoothly. Okay. Now, so I'll read that hymn again. Ford, ho, Ford, we are 12, ho, make us one, like drops within the social river. Oh, make us now together run, as swiftly as thy shining flivver. 12 yearning stanzas, and then the loving cup was passed a second time. "I drink to the greater being," was now the formula. All drank. Tirelessly the music played, The drums beat. The crying and the clashing of the harmonies were an obsession in the melted bowels. The second solidarity hymn was sung. Come, greater being, social friend, annihilating 12 in one. We long to die, for when we end, our larger life has but begun. Again, 12 stanzas, but this time the soma had begun to work. Eyes shone, cheeks were flushed, the inner light of the universal benevolence broke out on every face in happy, friendless smiles. Even Bernard himself a little melted, while Morgana Rothschild turned and beamed at him. He did his best to beam back, but the eyebrow, that black 2-in-1, alas, it was still there. He couldn't ignore it, couldn't, however hard he tried. The melting hadn't gone far enough. Perhaps if he had been sitting between Fifi and Joanna. For the third time, the loving cup won around. I drink to the imminence of his coming, said Morgana Rothschild, whose turn it happened to be to initiate the circular rite. Her tone was loud, exultant. She drank and passed the cup to Bernard. I drink to the imminence of his coming, he repeated, with a sincere attempt to feel that the coming was imminent. But the eyebrows continued to haunt him, and the coming, so far as he was concerned, was horribly remote. He drank and handed the cup to Clara deterring. It'll be a failure again, he said to himself. I know it will. But he went on doing his best to beam. The loving cup had made its circus. No. The loving cup had made its circuit. Lifting his hand, the president gave a signal. The chorus broke out into the third solidarity hymn. Feel how the greater being comes. Rejoice and in rejoicing die. Rejoice and in rejoicings die. Melt in the music of the drums, for I am you and you are I. As verse succeeded verse, the voices thrilled with an ever intenser excitement. The sense of the coming's imminence was like an electric tension in the air. Yeah, the sense of the coming's imminence was like an electric tension in the air. The president switched off the music, and with the final note of the final stanza, there was absolute silence. The silence of stretched expectancy, quivering and creeping with the galvanic life. The president reached out his hand. Suddenly a voice, a deep, strong voice, more musical than any merely human voice, richer, warmer, more vibrant with love and yearning and compassion. A wonderful, mysterious, supernatural voice spoke from above their heads, very slowly. Oh, forward, forward, forward. It was diminishingly and on a descending scale. A sensation of warmth radiated shrillingly out from the solar plexus of every extremity of the bodies of those who listened. Tears came into their eyes, their hearts, their bowels seemed to move within them, as though with an independent life. Forward, they were melting. Forward, dissolved, dissolved. Then, in another tone, suddenly, startlingly, listen, trumpeted the voice. Listen! They listened. After a pause, sank to a whisper, but a whisper somehow more penetrating than the loudest cry. The feet of the greater being, they went on, and repeated the words. The feet of the greater being. The whisper almost expired. The feet of the greater being are on the stair. The feet of the greater being are on the stairs. And once more there was silence, and the expectancy, momentarily relaxed, was stretched again, totter, totter, even almost to the tearing point. The feet of the greater being, oh, they heard them, coming softly down the stairs, coming nearer and nearer down the invisible stairs, the feet of the greater being, and suddenly the tearing point was reached. Her eyes staring, her lips parted. Morgana Rothschild sprang to her feet. "I hear him!" she cried. "I hear him! He's coming!" shouted Serenji Engels. "Yes, he's coming! I hear him!" Fifi Bradlaugh and Tom Kawaguchi rose simultaneously to their feet. "Oh! Oh! Oh!" Joanna inarticulately testified. "He's coming!" yelled Jim Bukanovsky. The president leaned forward and, with a touch, released a delirium of cymbals and low brass, a fever of tom-tomming. "Oh, he's coming!" screamed Clara deterring. And it was as though she were having her throat cut. Feeling that it was time for him to do something, Bernard also jumped out and shouted, "I hear him! He's coming!" But it wasn't true. He heard nothing, and for him, nobody was coming. Nobody. In spite of the music, in spite of the mounting excitement. But he waved his arms. He shouted with the best of them. And when the others began to jig and stamp and shuffle, he also jigged and shuffled. Round they went, a circular procession of dancers, each with hands on their hips of the dancers proceeding, round and round, shouting in unison, stamping it to the rhythm of the feet with their music, beating it out with their hands on the buttocks in front. 12 pairs of hands beating as one, 12 buttocks slappily resounding. 12 is one, 12 is one. I hear him coming. The music quickened. Faster beat the feet. Faster fell the rhythmic hands. And all at once, a great synthetic bass boomed out the words which announced the approaching atonement and final consummation of solidarity, the coming of the 12 in one, the incarnation of the greater being. Orgy porgy, it sang, while the tom-toms continued to beat their feverish tattoo. Orgy porgy, forward and fun, kiss the girls and make them one. Boys at one with girls at peace. Orgy porgy gives release. Orgy porgy, the dancers caught up the liturgical refrain. Orgy porgy, forward and fun, kiss the girls. And as they sang, the lights slowly began to fade, and at the same time to grow warmer, richer, redder, until at last they were dancing in the crimson twilight of an embryo store. Orgy porgy. In their blood-colored and fetal darkness, the dancers continued for a while to circulate, to beat and beat out the indefatigable rhythm. Orgy porgy. Then the circle wavered, broke, fell in partial disintegration on the ring of couches which surrounded, circle enclosing circle, the table, and its planetary chairs. Orgy porgy. Tenderly the deep voice crooned and cooed. In the red light, it was as though some enormous Negro dove Tenderly, the deep voice crooned and cooed. In the red light, it was as though some enormous negro dove were hovering benevolently over and now prone or over the now prone or supine dancers. They were standing on the roof. Big Henry had just sung 11. The night was calm and warm. "Wasn't it wonderful?" sighed Fifi Bradlaugh. "Wasn't it simply wonderful?" She looked at Bernard with an expression of rapture, but of rapture in which there was no trace of agitation or excitement, for to be excited is still to be unsatisfied. Hers was the calm ecstasy of achievement, consummation, the peace, not of mere vacant satiety. Hold on. I want to make sure I get this right. Satiety? Satiety. Satiety. There we go. She looked at Bernard with an expression of rapture, but of rapture in which there was no trace of agitation or excitement. For to be excited is still to be unsatisfied. Hers was the calm ecstasy of achieved consummation, the peace not of mere vacant satiety and nothingness, but of balanced life, of energies at rest and in equilibrium, a rich and living peace. For the solidarity service had given as well as taken, drawn off only to replenish. She was full. She was made perfect. She was still more than merely herself. "Didn't you think it was wonderful?" she insisted, looking into Bernard's face with those unnaturally shining eyes. "Yes, I thought it was wonderful." He lied and looked away. The sight of her transfigured face yes, I thought it was wonderful. He lied and looked away. The sight of her transfigured face was at once an accusation and an ironically reminder and an ironical reminder of his own separateness. He was as miserably isolated now as he had been when service began. More isolated by reason of his unreplenished emptiness, his dead satiety, separate and unatoned, while the others were being fused into the greater being, alone even in Morgana's embrace, much more alone, indeed, more hopelessly himself than he had ever been in his life before. He had emerged from that crimson twilight into the common electric glare with a self-consciousness intensified to the pitch of agony. He was utterly miserable, and perhaps her shining eyes accused him. Perhaps it was his own fault. "Quite wonderful," he repeated, but the only thing he could think of was Morgana's eyebrow. And that is the end of chapter 5. What a fucking shit show. Still. But in a different way. Alright. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.